Hello, welcome to my video sample for my presentation on the topic of consulting. I really like giving this presentation because I feel it's another one of those areas that is really prevalent in business today, but tends to not get covered in terms of any formal education. So literally in all the professional jobs I've had in my life, I've had to deal with consultants, either as the consultant myself or on the client side. There's always been a consulting relationship at some point with each of my employers. So I don't know how representative I am, but if I'm representative at all, it's clear that consulting is a prevalent part of life in business life today. And I wanted to go over some tips and avoid some potential pitfalls that you can fall into and help explain it a little bit more formally. The audience that this is geared towards is twofold. The primary audience is the users of consultants, that is potential consulting clients or current consulting clients, helping them understand and deal with some of the relationships there. And also it could be used for, the other audience could be current consultants or people considering consulting as a career. It helps give some generalizations about the industry that might help people manage their career as a consultant. So with that in mind, let's get started. I've got several things that I want to talk about for this sample. First, I want to talk a little bit about the types of consulting. Second of all, I want to talk about the best practices for selecting a consulting firm and working with a consulting firm. And then I want to talk about some of the potential pitfalls you can fall into. And then I want to talk about just some miscellaneous subjects that I think are important to cover on the topic. And bear in mind, as a sample, this is just these are not comprehensive lists. I have more in my live presentations, particularly on the best practices and working with consultants, and also on the potential pitfalls. So let's start off with the types of consulting. The first type of consulting that you oftentimes end up with is a subject matter expert. That means that they're not general consultants, they're specific to a certain industry, product, tool, or function. So let's talk about first the industry or product. A good example of this is there are certain people who have design expertise and they become consulting in that area. I'll use it for example, you know, if you look at the airplanes now, they oftentimes have the little shark fins, the winglets on the tips of the wings there. That's a fuel economy saving product, and there are some people who are really expertise in that particular product, and they consult to the airline developer, the aircraft manufacturers. Another thing that subject matter that someone could be an expert in is the tool or concept. And by tool, I don't mean machinery, wrench, or hammer. I mean sort of the consulting concept. So for example, ISO 9000 certification or Six Sigma or quality circles. I'm using quality as my example here, but they're sort of the expert at applying a certain concept to new businesses and new industries. And we're going to get into, sometimes that can be a little faddish, we'll get into that later, but that's the area that they're subject matter expert in. And the last one is a functional area, a business function like human resources or public relations, or perhaps even like marketing or bringing a product to market, new product development. One of the biggest functional areas now in consulting, probably the biggest, is IT. There are a lot of the firms out there now are, a lot of the big consulting firms are being bought by, merging with, or buying IT consultancies. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the issues that might face later. So that's a subject matter expert. The other kind of consultant that you might get into is a more general consulting firm or a management consulting firm. And they're better at sort of looking across the industry, and they claim to be generalists and understand how things integrate together in business. But I still think that they tend to skew a little bit towards certain functional areas. I point out operations. Oftentimes they want to talk to you about your manufacturing or supply chain or your well, I'll leave it at that. Also like Salesforce productivity, or their strategy firms like the big players like McKinsey, Bain, BCG. they tend to focus as generalists. I oftentimes think that to some extent they're almost like they have their own set of toolkits, or they have their own variety of functional areas within their firm. So even though the firm is general, oftentimes the project, the assignment, the project that they're working on is actually functional or deals with a specific tool that they might have developed. Another kind of, so those are probably the two biggest ones that people think of when they think consulting, but it's also important to note there's also relationships consulting relationships, which is where they might call themselves a consultant, but what they really do is they know the people in a certain industry that you're trying to enter, or sometimes this is political. They might know the players in a country that you're trying to expand into, or they might even sort of be a quasi-lobbyist. They know how to get regulation, how to manage your relationships with the government. And so really when you're paying them, it's not because they know your industry very well or because they're sort of strategy or management consultants. They call themselves consultants, but they're really just facilitators. They're introducing you to the right people. And you have to be a little careful with that because oftentimes this has historically been used, if you're doing business overseas, as an end run around anti-bribery laws. So you'll pay a consultant a large fee and they will then go bribe people on your behalf, and you will get the contract, and then you can always have the plausible deniability of saying you had no idea that that's what was happening. And they're cracking down on that. The laws are getting tougher about that, so beware. The last one I want to talk about is, which is oftentimes called consulting, but I think oftentimes it's exaggerated to call it consulting. It's really more of a contract labor or an outsourcing. This might be where there's some work that you need performed in a certain functional area, and rather than hire a full-time person, you're not sure it's enough for a full-time person or a full-time resource, or to hire a whole team of people, so you just contract it to someone who already does it. And the reason I always like to point out the difference between contracting and consulting being more, they're bringing the ideas to you rather than the labor itself. And the reason for that is because it oftentimes has a very different pay scheme. So if you're outsourcing or having contract labor, you're usually doing it to save money. And if you're consulting, it oftentimes charges you a premium for a more short-term assignment. But the thing to bear in mind is you don't want to end up in a situation where you confuse the two and you end up contracting something out and paying more money, but not getting that incremental idea, the advantage of the ideas. So those are a variety of types of consultants that I talk about. Now let's move on a little bit and talk about some of the best practices. And the first ones deal with when you're deciding to have a consulting engagement. The first thing you want to do is know your purpose. Now that might seem obvious, but I'm going to give you a couple of exceptions to that. The obvious purposes are you want to know what to do. If you're hiring them because you're thinking of entering a market, you're hiring them to tell you how big the market will be potentially, or what the best entry strategy is. So essentially you're hiring them to answer a question for you, do some research, do some analysis, and answer a question. But there are some alternatives. One of them is it might be more general. It might be just for brainstorming. You're looking to bounce some ideas off someone, and you need some people with some out-of-the-box thinking from outside the industry. And another reason that I think is particularly less obvious is oftentimes you're trying to sell your ideas to your board of directors or to other people within the firm, and you hire a consulting firm to almost lend credibility to what you want to do. And that's those can have some differences in terms of who you hire and what you try and use them for. So for example, if you're looking to answer a question, you might be looking for, if you're looking for something narrow, you might want the best product subject matter expert, but if you're looking to sell something to the board of directors, you might want the marquee name of the most reputable firm you can hire. Let's move on from knowing your purpose. You also want to know the value proposition, and this gets back to some of the different types of consultants there are. For example, you don't want to hire someone with a lot of narrow industry product expertise to try and answer a general question, because that's better for a generalist firm. And it's also important to note that the classic question you'll oftentimes
During my time at Bain & Company, I was once staffed on a project to help an international alcohol player enter India. So the first step for me, before I actually start doing the analysis, was to plan the analysis. I did a little bit of research and found out that there were 5 potential routes that my client can take to enter India. The first way was a greenfield entry. Greenfield entry is nothing but starting from the scratch, building own distribution, own brands, own production facilities. The second option was setting up a brownfield operation, which is acquiring existing production facilities to make new production facilities. The third step was doing an alliance. Alliance is nothing but partnering with an existing entity on using things such as licensing. It's a non-binding agreement. The fourth way is a joint venture. A joint venture is when two entities come together and form a third entity with its own set of operations. And then the fifth and the final way was to actually acquire an existing player in the Indian market. So I took this 5 set of pieces to my partner, agreed with him, and I knew that this is where I had to start my analysis. What was I effectively doing? I was effectively building a hypothesis on how to solve my problem. A hypothesis is nothing but a structured way of planning your analysis. What is the most important characteristic of a good hypothesis? The most important characteristic is MECE. M-E-C-E, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. All it means is a collection of elements which are non-overlapping and together form the universe. Let's actually take a simple example to understand MECE. Let's say your client was facing declining revenues and he had to build a hypothesis on how to evaluate the reason of declining revenues. The first way or the first reason is declining volumes. The second reason is fewer customers, and the third reason is declining prices. Is this a MECE framework? No. It's exhaustive because it talks about volume and price both, but it overlaps. The declining volume and fewer customers effectively means the same thing. Then what is a good hypothesis for a problem such as this? A good hypothesis would include volume and price. The reason could be for volumes to decline, fewer customers, fewer order size per customer, or on prices, the reason could be declining prices. So these are the reasons why the revenues could be declining. And this is a MECE framework which talks about both volume and price and does not overlap. If it makes easy for you to remember, keep in mind MECE is an opposite of messy. MECE, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. But it may not always be intuitive to build a hypothesis such as this. Sometimes the situation can be much more complex. Let's take a rather difficult example. On another assignment at Bain & Company, I was working for an agricultural player. The agricultural player heard from its customers that starch is a phenomenal market to enter. And obviously, the client reached out to me for recommendations on starch. What do you think was my first question? My first question in my mind was, how does starch look? I had no idea about this industry. But because I had no idea about this industry, it was even more important that I structure my thoughts, I develop a hypothesis to plan the analysis before I actually do the analysis. I started to do some quick research. I spoke to some experts and found out that there were 3 questions I had to answer. I had to understand what are the sources of producing starch products. Second, I had to understand what are those products that my client had to produce. And then finally, what customers does my client serve? If you step back, you'd realize that effectively this forms a value chain. Sources, products, customers. And always remember, when you don't know what a starting point is, value chain is always a good idea. Value chains are always MECE. But I knew that this wasn't enough for me to develop the hypothesis. And I had to flesh this out even further. So I did some more research to understand what exactly is under sources, under products, and under customers. For this particular module, let me actually try and explain what I did in customers. I found out that there were 2 customers that my client could serve. There were the B2B customers, the corporate customers, or there could be the B2C customers, which is the retail customers. And I found out that within B2B, there were 3 big industries that use starch: food, textile, and paper. So I developed my structure, my hypothesis tree, helping the client enter India in the starch market, understanding the sources, understanding the products, understanding the customers, within customers B2B, B2C, and within B2B food, textile, and paper. These were the things that I had to do during my analysis. The next step for me was really to take this to the partner, agree with him that this was the right hypothesis, and then plan my analysis, source data, source benchmarks, and develop recommendations. So you realize that building a hypothesis may not always be intuitive, but it's extremely effective. You want to do a good hypothesis because you want to make sure that when you make progress, you don't make mistakes and you don't have to come back. Developing a good hypothesis, a messy hypothesis, will help you get to your analysis in the first go. Or otherwise, you might have to go, do the analysis, come back, revisit your hypothesis. It's like a snakes and ladders problem. You don't want to get to 98 and then come back to 2. But at the same time, my colleagues, I have made multiple mistakes in developing the hypothesis. So don't be afraid of developing the hypothesis. Develop it, you'll make mistakes, learn from it. Next time you will develop an even better hypothesis. It's an art, and you have to master it over time.
Show of hands of how many of you are using MySQL? Anybody? Anybody? Anybody running that on the Windows box? Windows box? Linux boxes with MySQL? Anybody? All right, thank you. Oh, my name is Dennis, and we're going to talk about basically turning some of your skills into a consulting business, if some of you are interested in that. So we're going to cover quite a bit of ground, so let's jump right into it, if you don't mind. Sure. First off, I want to start with a disclaimer. I am neither a lawyer nor an accountant, and I'm not here to give you any sort of specific advice regarding those parts of starting a business. Feel free to ask me questions afterwards. I can speak from experience, but again, anything contained in these slides, I am not a lawyer nor an accountant. As far as what I've been doing for the past 2 years, I've been running my own consulting business, basically doing web application, database development, and also a bit of writing. So basically what I have here and put together here is based on my experiences, as far as the steps I took, some of the pitfalls I had, and also some of the rules of thumb that I've seen develop. So first thing we're going to talk about is why we want to do consulting in the first place. Next, as far as keeping it all legal, what we need to do with taxes and business organization and things along those lines. Then we're going to talk about when you start out, what are you going to need? What are the steps you need to take? And in your first 100 days, as far as what steps are involved, how do you find clients, things along those lines. A step after that is how do you keep those clients happy? As a consultant, as an independent consultant, you're going to live and die by your client list, so it's very important to keep that client list strong. Next, we're going to talk about other things you can do to help your business, help yourself. I'm going to share with you some keys to success that I've found in the past 2 years. I'm going to share some resources with you, and then I'd rather just open it up to the floor for any questions you may have, and also questions for afterwards if you see me walking around and whatnot. So jumping right in, why should we consider consulting in the first place? I would imagine that most of the people in here are employed now, so why should we even consider this? Part of the reason I think that you should be interested in this is demand, quite frankly. It's no secret that mainstream media is constantly reporting on security breaches and viruses and whatnot, so there really is a strong demand for your skills, right, as a security specialist. I don't think I have a client on my roster that hasn't at one time asked me for some sort of recommendation for a security expert, because companies would really rather hire a consultant than face the media embarrassment and the costs involved with having a break-in and whatnot. So companies are willing to spend on security, and that's something, though, that it's your opportunity to capitalize on that. Next is be your own boss, and that pretty much speaks for itself. Get the chance to work at home, set your own hours. And just because you want to be your own boss doesn't mean you have to run a .com. There's many independent consultants like myself working along with .coms and other companies that aren't necessarily internet-based, and being very successful at it. So there's opportunities there. Next benefit I find is your tax rates. Being a self-employed individual is one of the best ways to lower your taxes, as far as I know. And all the deductions you get. Any computers you buy, network equipment, those are all tax write-offs in the end. You get yourself a good accountant and they can help you with that, as far as identifying what parts of your home you use and what parts of your own assets you use. Can really lower your tax rates. Consulting is also a really good way to expand your skill set. Clients will demand different things of you and in different time schedules, which you will have to keep. And I think you'll find that when you're working by yourself, you'll develop a motivation to expand your skill set and hopefully improve yourself as well as help your clients along. And finally, one of the benefits of consulting and really being self-employed is you can follow other pursuits. I'm sure some of you here have other interests that go beyond computers and whatnot, or perhaps specific computer interests. For me, that's other pursuits I've taken up is writing. I've worked with Rocks a little bit, helping co-authoring books, and also speaking at conferences like this. This is something that I enjoy. And naturally, you will find pursuits as you have more free time for yourself that you will want to pursue. So the first thing we should talk about is keeping it all legal as far as what paperwork and documents you're going to need. And actually, you should take note that these steps are in order. You will need, for example, you'll need to set up your tax information before you go ahead and get your business name. So as I go through these, keep in mind that this is actually a step-by-step list. After making the decision to go out on your own, you need to go ahead and establish your company, and you need to mentally figure out how you're going to do that. Are you going to have employees, or are you going to work by yourself? Is there a coworker or a friend you're going to go in partners with? That's also important. And also, are you going to incorporate? Are you going to become a corporation, or are you going to keep it as a self-owned company? There's different liability issues involved in that. That's something that you need to decide. Next is taxes. Taxes, main thing you need is what's known as a federal employee ID number, also known as FEIN. Basically, it's a social security number for companies. It's a way that the IRS uses to track companies and the taxes owed and whatnot. After that, you need to investigate your city. Find out if your city charges taxes on companies. Some cities tax companies, others don't. That's something you can find out from your local city hall. Licensing, also something related to your city hall. You need to establish your business name and register your business name with the proper offices. In some cases, again, depending on the city you live in, you'll need to be licensed. You'll need to have special permits. If you're running it out of your home, you may not have to have as many permits. It really depends on your city. When I start talking about taxes and the IRS and licensing, I know it may sound a little complex, but as far as the IRS forms, you can literally do it over the phone. You fill out the form, you keep it in front of you, you call up an 800 number in Philadelphia. 10 minutes later, you have a federal employee ID, so it's really not an involved process. As far as your business name and licenses, it's just a matter of spending a morning at City Hall. You go down there on a Monday, you go to the information desk, and they can guide you through. And really, within a day's worth of work, you can take care of your taxes and your licensing. It's really quite simple, even though you do have to deal with forms and whatnot. Next, you have your bank accounts. Bank accounts have a variety of options. You can go with your local bank. As long as you have your federal employee ID number, that's really all you're going to need. Nowadays, there's also brokerage offices offering business accounts that have different interest rates and whatnot. That's something that you can investigate on your own, but really your local bank will do just fine. As long as you have something that's separate from your own personal accounts, that'll really help you in the end for tax season. And finally, The last thing you need to take care of is insurance. Some states have legislation in the works that would require consultants to be insured. If I remember right, California is one of them. Other states don't really care. So it really all depends on where you live and the laws in your area. As far as starting out, there's a couple of things that perhaps you should consider. What's your current employment like? In many cases, your current employer can make a great first client, depending on how vital you are to their operations and how your relationship is with them. Also, your finances and your current lifestyle. Some of you in here may have car payments, others are not. If you live with your parents or share living expenses, that could certainly help. You really need to take into account as far as what your monthly expenses are and how your savings and whatnot to help you along with that. Insurance, and by insurance I mean health insurance at this point. When you leave your employer, you also leave your benefits, unfortunately. So benefits are something you need to provide for yourself. Health insurance can run you anywhere from $50 a month to $200 a month. But either way, it's something that's vital and you should have. And there's other factors as far as your own personal relationships. I had a friend in Connecticut who was about to start his own consulting business and then found out he was going through a divorce. Probably not the best time to start a consulting business. So it really all depends on your own personal situation and your finances and how you want to go about it. Next, you need to see if you need a lawyer or an accountant. Personally, I think you can do it without either one of those. Obviously, it can also help you to have a second hand there, have a lawyer look over your forms and whatnot, but you can do it on your own. That's a personal decision. Some people just feel more comfortable working with a lawyer or an accountant. And then finally, you're going to have investors. That really all depends on how involved you want to get with your business. If you're going to have your own storefront where clients are going to come in, or you're going to work out of your home, there's quite a difference there in what funding you're going to need. Question? Yeah.
I have a friend of mine. He started his own business.
Yes.
So what he did, he worked out with a lawyer and a company. He said that was a good way to meet people because they have other clients. Was to trade services, to do a service for them and write them a check and do a service back to them and so forth. And both use right up.
For those that didn't catch that, his comment was regarding getting a lawyer and accountant. It is possible sometimes to trade services, your services for theirs, and there are some tax benefits involved in that. And I'll get into that just a little bit with networking and your clients and whatnot, but that's a good point. Leading up from the discussion on investors is your workspace. Again, are you going to have office space? If you're going to have a partner, you're going to have maybe 3 or 4 people working for you, yeah, you should look into it. If you're going to start on your own, just have it a sole proprietorship, you could probably do it out of your home or an extra bedroom or whatnot. You're also going to need just general supplies as far as notepads and pens and pencils, things like that. And then, of course, all your equipment. You're going to need your computers, any extra phones and phone lines you're going to need. And miscellaneous things. Maybe you need to upgrade your internet connection, things along those lines. Again, these are all tax write-offs, so maybe a big expense to begin with, but there are benefits towards the end. Your total startup time is going to be affected by your decisions. If you're going in with a partner and you need to wait for your partner to find a good stopping point to leave his current job, that's going to affect it. If you're on your own, you could probably start it by yourself overnight. As far as how I did it, how I went about it, just to give you an example, I came out of college, I worked for a company for 3 months, completely hated it, and I quit. Next day, I figured I had a bit of savings, had extra phone line, upgraded to a cable modem, and got a website going. And we'll talk about establishing a presence, but for myself, this total startup time was about a week's worth of work of dealing with paperwork and whatnot, about a $1,500 investment in equipment and computers and things along those lines. And literally within a week, I was to a point where I could start looking for clients and whatnot. And again, that can be as short as a couple days, or it could be a couple months for you, depending on your savings and how you want to go about it. As far as the first 100 days, question.
This startup
That's a good question. His question was if the startup phase can be done as you're finishing up your job in a part-time basis. That's possible, but you will have to take some time off during business hours to, again, go to your city hall and take care of that kind of paperwork. But sure, it's definitely possible. Go ahead and do that on the weekends and during your other free time. Yeah, definitely not impossible. Please.
In regards to setting this thing up either at a office or in your home, have you done any security-related services that were adversely affected by either having this out of a personal home by a more corporate front?
All right, this question was regarding security companies in specifically, is that right? Where starting it in your home or as opposed to a storefront. I really couldn't imagine a situation where there'd be a big difference. Perhaps in the storefront it might be easier to get the extra phone lines and connections you're going to need as opposed to a residential area because of the wiring in your city. But otherwise I couldn't think of a reason why they make a difference.
Well, the question was more general into getting clients. If you noticed any clients more willing to accept a smaller firm based out of an office park versus a smaller firm based out of a house, especially with something maybe as secure or maybe as sensitive as penetration data or their infrastructure.
No, I don't think that would make a difference. Most of the time, you'll be requested to travel to the client side as opposed to the reverse. So it's not like you'll have to entertain clients in your home very often. But for security purposes, I think they understand that there's a inherent need to be off-site, and I really don't think it would make a difference, at least to the clients I've come across, that would base their decision on that. Please. Right. Well, actually, that'll depend on a client-by-client basis. Some clients will hand you a 20-page NDA, other clients will hand you a one-page NDA, and others don't really care. So it really depends. And I handle that personally. I just, on a client-by-client basis, during the startup phase, when you're pitching your client, they'll make sure to tell you what their requirements are. But really, it varies quite a bit. Please. Yes. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part. Right. I definitely don't disagree with your points. I did go about it with an accountant, but others can choose not to. It really depends. As far as the other points with liability and whatnot, again, I really think that depends on a client-by-client basis. It certainly doesn't hurt to talk about that, and it depends on the documentation they give you.
They give you the documentation and controls and then I've seen 30 NDAs, I've seen 20 NDAs, I've seen
Sure,
20 pages.
sure,
But oftentimes when you read through them,
sure.
then oftentimes they're asking you to do things which are actually not in your best interests. And it's much better to have a very good understanding of what you're actually going to achieve out of a non-disclosure agreement contract and making sure that you don't sign something that's going to prejudice you one way or the other against the future contracts or competitor. So you've got to really understand what you're trying to get out of it and try and find a contract or NDA
I would have a hard time presenting an NDA to a client. It usually doesn't work that way because they obviously have more consultants than probably you do clients, and they have a very standardized process of how they go out with their NDAs. So, I'm sorry? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first part. But I think they'll say no a lot more than they'll say yes. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll try to repeat his comments. Was there?
Depends on the size of the organization. A large organization, the more difficult it gets to accept your NDA. Medium-sized SMEs, no problem. Large organizations, yeah, they'll talk about an NDA, but if you go in there and talk over the amount and say, well, what you're going to achieve, then you often get more out of the conversation rather than signing a piece of paper or a pretty document. But you don't really understand what it is you're signing up.
Okay, to repeat, his comments are regarding a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA, and he's advocating perhaps coming up with your own non-disclosure agreement and presenting it to your client as opposed to them presenting you with their non-disclosure agreement. His points are valid and it is worth trying, but I would disagree with that personally. Certainly it depends also on what type of clients you will target. I agree with you that larger clients are probably going to turn you down a lot more than the smaller clients. At the same time, with the smaller clients, perhaps they've never had an NDA agreement before. That's very common. Or in some cases, they'll shy away from that. It depends on how small of a client. Some people still like to do business with a handshake. Maybe not the best way, but it does happen. Please. Address what was going on. Again, just to recap, the question in the back was regarding NDAs as far as who's protecting whom. Are they requesting more protection from non-competes and whatnot, or are you requesting protection that they won't disclose your methods and whatnot? As far as presenting your client with an NDA that protects your operations and your methods or and whatnot, I'm sorry, but I would have to disagree. I think that if you present your clients with an NDA with those involved, you will probably lose more clients than you will get in the end. Also, most NDAs, as far as what the client will present to you, the most important part, again, addressing the question in the back, is probably on the non-competes. Non-competes are common in an NDA where they will ask you to not compete with their competitors or subsidiaries of their competitors and whatnot, or even in some cases their clients. And commonly, it's usually a year's worth of time where you can't directly work with them. That's probably the most important part for you as a consultant. But again, I would have to disagree that presenting your client with an NDA is probably a deal killer more than it is a deal maker. Please.
All about being professional. What we're going to do, I'll hang you with it. We're going to deal with great deals. We just go about it in a professional way.
Yeah, but unfortunately, demand doesn't imply an exclusive market. Any contract that you have, when the client's going to put an RFP out there, there's certainly going to be more than your bid. And in that negotiating process, that's something that they will look at. And again, I think it would probably cost you more clients than it would gain you.
I think we haven't gone way up.
Yes, we have.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're all very interested in how to get our presence out there.
Let me get the question in the back. The gentleman's been very patient, please. Perhaps we can discuss this afterwards. I'll definitely be around, and I'm sure other attendants will be around. I'd just like to run through the rest of it, because I think we're running really, really short on time. Sorry to interrupt you like that, but let's go ahead. Your presence, pretty much self-explanatory. Phone, want to have a dedicated business line. Your website. Again, your website can really serve as your storefront nowadays. And it doesn't have to be that fancy. Who you are, what your experience has been like, and what you're looking for. Initially, you won't have a client list, but once you do, you will want to put it up there. Your client list will sell you more times than anything else you will ever do. And then, of course, search engine registration. Register yourself with the engines out there, and also there's a lot of consulting directories out there that you want to register yourself with. Business cards, probably one of your best form of advertising. The only advertising I did when I first started out was I just handed out my business cards like crazy. You call up old friends in college, you let people know, hey, you know what, I'm on my own now. This is what I can offer for your company. Call me if you need something. And really, in some cases, that can be the only type of promotion you're going to have to do. Other forms of promotion, a lot of options. You can start off with a big bang and buy a full page ad in a local tech journal or something along those lines. Or again, you can just do it by word of mouth, handing your business cards out, coming to conferences like this. It's really up to you. Either way, I think you'll see enough demand out there where you'll at least generate some interest just by letting people know that you're on your own and this is what you can offer. As far as keeping clients happy, definitely don't overpromise. Try to stay within your boundaries of your skill set. I think you'll find that they'll appreciate that more than you just saying, you know what, I can't offer that service for you. That will probably keep them a lot more happy. And definitely don't underperform. It's always beneficial to set up specs as far as what your client expects from you, and you make sure that you meet those to the T. Usually when I give my clients specs of what I'm going to return to them, I do it in bullet point format. That way you can really lay it out and say, hey, look, this is what I'm promising you, and this is what the finished product does, so our business is complete. Be available. I can't tell you how many times I've won contracts just because a client is fed up of not being able to get their consultant on the phone. Get a cell phone and return your calls. That's something that's very simple, will really go a long way. Deadlines. Deadlines are very important. Your client will make other deadlines based on the deadlines you give them. If you can't meet it, tell them, hey, look, you know what, we're a week out. I'm not going to make next week's deadline. The communication there is a lot more important than showing up and not having a finished product. Finally, network for your client. I think you'll find that big clients will come to you and outsource projects intentionally just based on the fact that by outsourcing to you, you can get them in contact with other clients and whatnot. I've had clients come to me and ask me to work on a project for them just because they want an introduction to another client I have. That's just the way business is done. So you'll find that just by being willing to network for your client, you will get other contracts in the end. Billing. Ask your client if they want a project or an hourly rate. Very important, and also very important to your bottom line. Invoicing, be diligent. Have your policies. I personally invoice on the 1st and the 15th of the month. You may want to do it monthly. You may want to do it weekly. Either way, let your client know. Unfortunately, one of the parts of consulting is you won't always get paid. You have to write off. You have to sue clients. That's unfortunately a way to do business. But it never hurts to be nice. Hey, listen, that invoice I sent you last week, could you check up on it? It was net 10 terms and it's due tomorrow. It never hurts to just give it a call and find out what's going on. Meet your clients' needs as far as try to anticipate their needs, what they have now. If they're looking at starting certain services or certain websites, do a little bit of research on their part. Find out what's coming down the road as far as technology-wise and what they can use. And then finally, client maintenance. If you don't know how to golf, start taking lessons now. Clients will expect for you to take them out to dinner. Gifts at Christmas time and whatnot never hurts, and it's part of doing business. An invitation for a round of golf on Friday, common ways of doing business. As far as other things you can do as a consultant, network. Places like this are a perfect part for it. Listservs, news groups. Get out there and just let people constantly know what you're doing. Things like this can lead to new contracts, potential partners, new employees, or even new subcontractors. There's other people just like you doing consulting that can do other things you can't. Form alliances, use their skills, bid on contracts together. This is how you build up your business and start bidding on bigger contracts. You also need to maintain and expand your skill set. Times change, and the skills that you have now aren't necessarily going to be in demand 5 years from now, so you need to make sure that you keep yourself relevant. And follow your other pursuits. If you have other interests, follow them. That's one of the benefits of being self-employed. Really quickly, some keys to success. Keep your discipline. Being self-employed doesn't mean you don't have to work. Nobody pays you for sitting around, and you'll very quickly find there's a difference between working hours and billable hours. So it does require quite a bit of discipline. Again, keep your clients happy. Communicate with them. Let them know you're available for them. Maybe you don't always return calls the same day, but let them know, hey, I return my calls within 24 hours. And most clients at least want to know when they can expect a call back. Always look for an opportunity for yourself and for your clients. New technologies, new companies out there, new potential partners. Always keep an eye out. Rules of thumb. When I first started out, one of the best pieces of, when I first started out, I spoke with other consultants. Best piece of advice I ever got was set your rate and never ever change it. Companies who tell you they won't pay your rate are lying to you. And you will have Fortune 100 companies tell you, oh, your rate's too high. Keep your rate, set it, work with your client on payment options, but make sure you never let anybody tell you your rate is too high. Invoice payments, again, you won't always get paid. Research your client ahead of time, it helps. You'll have to sue clients eventually, and unfortunately that's just the way it is. And finally, it always seems harder than what it is. Don't let the information overwhelm you. Again, when you start talking about taxes and IRS, it starts to get a little up there, but it's really not that bad. Some resources for you. Realrates.com. That's a very important site. Basically, it's a consultant site where consultants go in and they report their latest contracts and what they're getting paid. It helps you set your market rate, and it helps you go to your client and say, hey, look, I researched this. There's 5 other consulting companies charging this rate. This is my rate. A very important site. IRS, I think it's a very helpful site. A lot of their documents are downloadable in PDFs. It saves you trips to the library and whatnot. And finally, Small Business Administration, the SBA. A lot of good resources out there for business plans, financing, and just general advice. Excellent website. Definitely recommend it if you were thinking of starting out on your own. Summary, I'll skip over because I know we're running short. And again, just as the last point, it's really easier than you think. Don't let it overwhelm you. You can do this. It's not rocket science. It just takes a little time. So I appreciate you coming. Thank you.